Hi, welcome to Doing This Differently, a podcast that celebrates non-traditional family structures. I'm your host, Nicole Foley, a solo mom living in San Francisco with my daughter, Dylan. In each episode, we talk to families who are forging their own unique paths, and together we expand our definition of what family looks like. Today, we're talking to someone who decided to foster a teen with her husband and is a strong advocate for children in the foster care system. I'd like to introduce you to our guest, Mara Shore, and she is a highly regarded national consultant, speaker, and writer known for expertise in various fields. Professionally, she leaves her mark as an international speaker, author, and consultant. On a personal and community-oriented level, Mara has taken her late brother's struggle with drug use and turned his passing into fuel for change. Mara spent a year as a licensed foster parent through Embrace Families, having successfully navigated the Level 1 program while nurturing a teenager who recently transitioned into adulthood. Now Mara continues to use that insight volunteering as a volunteer advocate for children through the Guardian Ad Litem program with the Legal Aid Society of Orange County Bar Association in Orange County, Florida. She's been featured on Fearless Fostering and Surviving Sibling podcasts sharing her journey. Wow, Mara, you have done a lot, and we're so excited to talk to you today, especially because it's quite a unique journey how you got to fostering a teen. And so we're excited to hear all about that. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on today. It was definitely a journey, both before, during, and now in the after. So, we're gonna just jump right to it. I know one of the questions that I'm just gonna give a spoiler alert when I say the before, during, and the after is that has successfully, again, loose definition, right? We were all 18, 19 years old once, but she's launched on her own. So yeah. She no longer lives here, but she's still very much a part of our world.
I definitely call that a success. I mean, just the fact that she is self-sufficient and, just taking care of herself, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so I'm gonna share a little bit of background how I met Mara, because it's relevant to this whole conversation. Is that when I had Dylan back in 2021, I'm sure, like most new parents, it's a lot. It's very exhausting, especially in the middle of the night. And I just remember feeling very tired and frustrated, but also, like, in the middle of the night, I'm sure this happens without being a new parent, but you have a lot of intrusive thoughts maybe, and some anxiety. I know that definitely comes with having a child, because your body's been turned upside down and now you're not sleeping. But I kept thinking about, like, there was just a thought that kept ruminating, which is children need to be protected. Children need to be protected. They need to be safe. They need to be loved. There's just so much. And so then the rabbit hole that my brain went into at 3 a.m. on too many nights.
But all the best rabbit holes occur, really.
Oh, totally. It's prime time. Prime time for the intrusive thoughts.
Yes.
Was just like thinking about foster care. And so I started following what's an organization that's now called Foster Love, and a few other foster care accounts on Instagram, just to learn a little bit more. And I came across a wish list from, I believe, a 7-year-old boy in Oklahoma. And it was just a picture. The post was just a picture of his wish list. And it was rather alarming. And that's probably an understatement. It was like, I just remember the top 10 things on this child's list were pretty basic needs, like running water. But the one that disturbed me the most was like number 2 or number 3, which was that my family doesn't hit on me. And I just felt like, why does a 7-year-old even know what that term is? And I mean, I don't need to ask. I know, and it's so disturbing to me. So that got me very interested in doing a project on what would it look like? What would it look like for a child? Like, what does a trajectory look like for a child in the foster care system? And what does it look like if there are interventions, like really positive interventions? Like, where does that take that child? And, I started thinking about this project. I'm like, I really want to do this, but as this podcast is about, I'm a solo parent, and I just felt very limited on time and energy, and that is still the case. And so I have paused on that project, but if anybody's listening and is interested in collaborating on that, I would love to talk to you.
Yeah.
But in the process of doing some research, because I do not have a direct connection to foster care, and even though I have some friends who have fostered children and have done the foster to adopt, I myself, I haven't been in the system. I haven't adopted. I'm not a caseworker. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have like a direct connection to this experience. And so I posted something on LinkedIn saying that I wanted to talk to somebody, anybody in any part, any connection to the foster care system. And that's how some kind soul tagged Mara, and that's how we got connected. And I'm so happy because she and I have been in touch over the last year plus, ever since that happened. And so I thought I would love to talk to you on this podcast because I think choosing to be child free and then choosing to foster a teen is a pretty unique family, and it's perfect for our conversation today. So that's some context as to how Mara and I know each other. And from here on out, I'm going to start asking you questions, Mara.
Yes, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the environment you grew up in and how you envisioned your future with or without a family.
Yeah. So the environment that I grew up in, quite honestly, was not at all like the one that we have in our home now.
Mm.
So my parents divorced when I was in elementary school. And quite honestly, I moved around a lot. My husband grew up the exact opposite way, where his parents are still together. They hit their 50-year anniversary last year. And yeah, they, are still in the house that he grew up in.
Wow.
And so he and I grew up very, very differently.
Mm.
We have been together, it'll be 16 years next month. And
Congrats.
so we've, that part I'm going, wait a minute. I think I always joke I skipped over my first divorce, right? I waited until I was really 30, 31 years old to get married. And in the process, my husband and I had talked a lot about, do we want to have kids? Do we not want to have kids? I never saw myself as somebody that felt the biological urge to have children. I love kids. So it's everyone always says, "Oh, but you'll make a great mother." And I think I could have been a great biological mother, a great bio mom. But I also could be a lot of other things. And I always say I love aunting a lot more. And I love the kiddos that are already here and already exist more than I ever felt the need to procreate. And so we really had decided we weren't going to have kiddos. And I always said, never say never, just because I learned a lot along the way, just as my family evolved, my family changed, just as a whole extended family. We had a lot of death in our family. We had just all sorts of changes. And so I said, you know what? Never say never. Now we're like, nope, we're good. we're set. But along that path, obviously things shifted. So we just we had decided we weren't biologically going to have kids. That was the decision and really the conclusion we had come to.
Yeah. Well, good for you for that clarity. I think, especially more recently, I think people are really, really asking themselves, is this for me? And so I love that you and your husband, and, for two people to be on the same page with that is also a big feat.
We checked in with each other a lot. I checked
Mhm.
in probably every 6 months because I was always afraid, well, what if he changes his
Mm.
mind? And then next thing you know, we're 10 years in, we're 15 years in, right?
Right.
And just because we didn't do that check-in. So I always made sure, let me check in. I mean, somewhere along the line, we got it. I knew we were on the same page. But yeah, we just, my grandmother was a massive part of our world until she passed at 95 years old. And so she would spend nights here, she would spend weekends here. We included her in everything we did. Like we just built our family to suit what was working for us. It took a long time for some people in our family to really understand that we were not planning on having kids. And I remember a line from there's a book of short essays called Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed. And it's a book of short essays of people who had chosen not to have kids.
Hmm.
And there was a line in it that more than wanting kids, I want to have kids.
Mm.
Right. And I felt that so deeply. I read this book years ago. So if you are a family that in a couple or an individual that has chosen not to have kiddos in whatever shape or form, then I highly recommend this book. But I remember that line so much. And because you do, sometimes you feel more like an outcast for not wanting to
Totally.
biologically have children. So, and then the plan to not have kiddos just changed without us actually planning on it changing. So the
Sure.
universe had a way of doing things a little differently for us.
Completely. And your point about it is so confusing to people why like a heterosexual married couple would not want to have
Mhm.
children. And
Yeah.
to me, and like I'm actually a little offended by the name of that book because I
I would say
actually
it is, like, intentionally, like, tongue in cheek because it's all based right? So, yeah, like, it's all based off of what people say about us, like, "Oh, you're selfish, you're shallow, and you're self-absorbed," and I was like, "I've heard all of these things," right? All
totally.
of these things have been said to me.
I
Yeah.
mean, I definitely get that, but it's like I'm offended by those words as they relate
Mhm.
to this because that's always what comes up, and I just find that fascinating because I can't think of anything more selfless than deciding not to explore a path that there might be even just an ounce of curiosity about because you know that you don't want to show up for this other human in all these ways, like you want to just live your own life.
Mhm.
That's so
Yeah.
important because like if you do have a kid and you still feel that way, you're probably not going to give that child what they need, you
Right.
know? And so
Mhm.
I've actually always seen it as quite selfless because I think it's a big deal to choose to go in a very different direction than what the rest of the world wants to see you do. Because I
Mhm.
think so many of our choices can be driven, or at least some influence. And
Yes.
also to go back to an earlier thing, I love that you said that you skipped over your first marriage. Because
Oh, I did.
I mean, first of all, I love that line, but also, you know, it's so funny. I'm in San Francisco, so 31 is marrying very young. That is your
Yes.
first marriage for sure here.
Yes, well, and that was, my first marriage. Hopefully, this is my only marriage, right? But my parents were both married, divorced, and remarried by the time that they were the age that I
Oh,
had my
sure.
first marriage. So they
Oh,
were
sure.
all, between parents and step parents, they'd all had I've lost track of how many marriages there are between my parents and step
Mm,
parents. And so with that, I always say, yep, definitely. Like according to my family history, I skipped over my first divorce. So
hilarious. I love
and
that. I love
my
that.
parents were all for, oh yes, just wait till you're ready. That's
Sure.
absolutely okay.
I think that's very sage advice.
Mhm.
um,
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the foster care system. What was your entry point, and then I'd love to delve into like how you that sort of accidental path to being a foster parent.
Yeah. So back in, gosh, I think that it's almost one of these, how far back do you go in a story that really, when I look at it sometimes, my life had been leading up to where I am now and had been for a very long time. So back in 2019, my brother passed away at the very beginning. It was February 3rd of 2019. And
I'm
he
so
passed
sorry.
away, thank you, of 15 years of hard drug use, quite honestly. And it was not an overdose, but his body eventually shut down from one complication after another. And he had spent a month in the hospital in the ICU, on and off life support, and he had to have open heart surgery. He was on dialysis. There were just so many complications, and his body eventually gave out. So he passed away,
How
and
old was he?
he was only 32. So,
Wow.
which to me is very only, it seems very, to me that still feels very young. And I always say one of the things with having a sibling pass away is that the age gap. So in theory, it's, oh, he was 3 years younger, 3 years younger, right? So he was my baby brother, but
Right.
then, I'm no longer 35 or 36 or 37, I'm 40. And so so it's now been, we just celebrated the 5-year anniversary of his
Mm.
passing. And but I'd seen what drug use does not only to the person that is so deep in addiction, but to the family as well. And so my brother had no children that we know of. I hope that that doesn't change one day, that somebody pops up and we would have missed an
Oh,
entire
wow.
entire childhood of an aunt, of being an aunt or uncle to them. But
Yeah.
no, we my brother had no children. And so I was never put into that situation to raise them. But basically after he had passed, kind of was kicked into high gear with helping my grandmother through the last year of her life. I had been
Right.
her healthcare surrogate, her power of attorney, I would say, more so even than my husband, who I love so very much, but she had the greatest piece of my heart.
Hmm.
And she passed away February 29th of 2020. And at 95 years old, she lived this long life. She
Man.
lived life to the fullest, and forever grateful to have had her as long as I did, because I had her so stinking long. And
Hmm.
but then the pandemic happened, literally
Right.
days after her memorial, which was
Unbelievable.
March 15th of 2020. Basically, we just all kind of shut our doors and stayed home for a long, long time. And so I was left to sit with that level of grief, having experienced those two massive losses in my world.
Right.
And I was talking with one of my very best friends, and she is, at least, and it was at that point, on the board, and is very involved with Legal Aid Society
Mhm.
of the Orange County Bar Association here in Orange County, Florida. And I had said, I thought about helping in this way, or maybe doing something simple to do some sort of drive for this or that. And she said, have you thought about advocating for a kiddo in foster care? And I just said, Annie, I don't know anything about this. I've never experienced foster care. I myself am not a parent. I am not a lawyer. And in Orange County here in the state of Florida, you actually have to be a lawyer to be a guardian ad litem, which is
Mm.
where the program created what they call a volunteer advocate for children, so that those of us that are not lawyers are able to assist as advocates. And in most other places, the program doesn't require you to be a lawyer.
Mm.
So that really, that stipulation is not the case in most other places. Or they could go through the court appointed special advocate, which is often known as a CASA position.
Right.
So
Mhm.
I said, Annie, I don't know the law, I don't know foster care, and I don't have kids. Like, what makes you think that I am capable of doing this? Like, there's no way, there's no way. And she said, you know more than you think you do, with the time that you have spent between your brother and
Mm.
what you know of the system in that side, and the time you have spent advocating for your grandmother. Because she, as one of my very best friends, she also is completely in love with her grandmother. And
Mm.
so she understands this, right? This passion. And we had always traded stories. And so we knew, she knew before I did. And so at that point, she said, just get some more information about the program. She's like, I'll tell you as much as I can, but talk to the volunteer coordinator for this program. Just talk to her. She's wonderful. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it.
Mm.
But spend 15 minutes on the phone. And I did, and then spent more time on the phone and asked more questions. I joke that one day, many, many, many decades from now, hopefully it will say on my gravestone, but wait, I had one more question. Because if anything, I my journalism training, but I ask a lot of questions.
Sure.
And so I went on to take the training, got the certification the day that I was fingerprinted, because everybody dealing with
Mm.
minors, you do need to go through background checks.
Sure.
So
Good.
the day that I was getting my fingerprints done for the background check to be run, the kiddo who would be my very first assignment was being pulled into care that day. Little did we all know. And went on to get my first assignment,
Mm.
who um, just left the biggest piece of just biggest mark on my heart. So
Mm.
she was then 8. That was back in 2021 at this point. And like, spoiler alert, she'll be here in a few hours, and my husband and I are taking her out for Valentine's Day, because she's now our goddaughter. So
I love it. I love it
yes,
so much.
yes. So it's bowling and seafood for Valentine's Day
Perfect.
with an 11-year-old.
Perfect.
But so I went on to advocate for her, and then take on an additional case. So with a little baby,
Mm.
who was since adopted to the only family he's ever known, and his
Mm.
foster family had adopted him back in December.
I love it.
And I still get great updates on baby Jacob. And then we realized and found out that the original kiddo I had advocated for, she had cousins, one who had aged out of the foster care system and one who was still in the foster care system and had been bounced around a lot. And so I became her advocate as well. So that's when I
Wow.
became Hayden, who's our teenager, Hayden's advocate, and that was back in spring of 2022.
Wow. That's so
Yeah.
incredible. And so the reason why I love your story so much is that when I was having those like middle of the night crises of like children need to be protected, I also
Yeah.
felt extremely powerless because first of all, it's such a huge issue. And
Mhm.
to so many
Massive.
kids, there's nothing that one person can do to solve all of it, right?
Yeah.
And so it also just felt very overwhelming because it's like, well, if I wanted to be helpful, then I would take in a foster child. And I was just like, oh my God, that is so overwhelming. I can't even imagine that. And something that I did along the way was just learn about some of the other ways that you can support these children. And you've
Mhm.
mentioned a few of them. And CASA is the one that I was familiar with, the court appointed, what is the whole
Court
acronym?
appointed special advocate.
Special advocate. So
Mhm.
you are assigned to a child where
Mhm.
you have an opportunity to show up regularly for this child. So there's like some continuity, some consistency for them,
Yeah.
some stability.
Yes.
And then
And
and
I think that
go ahead.
that amount of time that you spend with them, I think differs state to state. For
Mm,
me, it was, under my particular program here in Orange County, Florida, they wanted at least one visit a month. And of course, my question was, what if something funky seems to be going on that I
mm,
feel like I need more eyeballs? And they said, if you feel like you need more eyeballs, then that's fine. We want to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks, right? So, and your role is to be an advocate for the child, not for
mm,
the parents, not for the biological parents, not for the foster parents, not for the school. Your job is to be an advocate for that child. And
right.
so depending on what that child's needs are, the level of involvement could be different
Hmm.
because the needs are different for every single kiddo. Some have
Sure.
more educational needs, some have more medical needs, some it's more just living situation. So some are great and safe where they are, like where they're placed when they're removed from their homes. Some are not.
Hmm.
And so that becomes your job to keep eyeballs. Yes, there's a caseworker, but they're as low as the numbers should be for the ratio of caseworker to kiddos.
Yeah.
Um, it's very similar to when we have overpopulation with
Hmm.
schools,
Hmm.
right? And the class sizes get too big, and you can't have that quality,
Totally.
1
Yeah.
to 15, 1 to 20 ratio. And so what those ratios should be is often not what they are. And you have a load of caseworkers that are just doing their best, but they're overworked and they're underpaid. And so
Totally.
that's where we rely on having others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that's something that probably way more people have the capacity for versus maybe taking a child into your home, right? And so I just would one of my hopes for anyone listening to this is that if there was a desire to help these children and they're like, but I can't, like for whatever reason I can't take on a child in my home, just there and we'll circle back to this at the end because I know that there's just more than one way. There's more than one way to like provide some sort of intervention where a child is being supported, even if it means you're not taking them into your home.
And there are so many opportunities to assist. There's different ways to advocate too. And I will tell you that being an advocate first helped me be a better foster parent.
That makes a ton of
Um,
sense because now you are extremely informed. Like you're seeing it very close up what these actual needs are, what the actual
yes.
conditions are in whatever situation they happen to be in. And to
And I
your
think you're
God,
better equipped to fight the system as well. And I hate to say that you need to fight the system, but as a
Makes
foster
sense.
parent, you're not only, I'm sorry,
It's
they're
okay.
barking in the background. As a foster parent, you're not only a, a parent, but you're co-parenting with the government. You could be co-parenting with their biological parent.
Hmm.
You could be co-parenting with other family members, but you're co-parenting with the system.
I was going to say,
And
just hearing that, I've never heard it phrased that way, like co-parenting with the government. I'm like,
Mhm.
that just sounds like a nightmare, but it also sounds like a
It is.
nightmare depending on the situation of, like whether it's the biological parents or maybe family members. It's like, of course the ultimate goal is that this child go to be with their family, but that's not always the best situation for them. And actually, one of the young adults who I spoke to who was in the system was reunified with her mom, and that was not a positive thing. And when she told me that she was reunified, I was like, oh, that's wonderful. And it's like, of course, because that's what we want to think, but she was like, no, it wasn't so good. And so, it's a really complex situation. And to your earlier point, it's like for every child there's a whole different world that you have to navigate with a whole different set of needs. And I also love the idea of advocating first, like, and it's also just to see, can your stomach handle this. I know for me, like, that just,
And
it really sounds challenging. Yeah.
often it can't, right? It doesn't mean that I won't absolutely do it again.
Mm.
In the process of getting ready for, for another case. But so it doesn't mean I won't do it again.
Lucky kiddo. Lucky kiddo.
But
Yeah.
I mean, not as a foster parent, but as
Uh,
an advocate,
Still,
right?
still.
Yeah, I've told my parent, I was like, well, or my husband, this time will remain as an advocate. But you know, there's so much about it that is just difficult, right?
Of
Whether
course.
you are a foster parent or an advocate, I think being on calls with the court. So at the time, court was still virtual, so I was
Hmm.
able to do it by phone. And even though those calls only maybe last 15 minutes, those 15 minutes on the phone determine what the next, I mean, it could be what the next month, 3 months, 6 months,
Sure.
year, or life of that kiddo
Mm.
that you're relying on someone else to make decisions about.
So critical.
It's
It's,
incredibly
yeah.
difficult.
Yeah.
Um, reading the files is one thing that I think never, anytime I get a new set of files about whether it was a kiddo I advocated for, or quite honestly, um, even our teenager.
Mm.
And it would be not necessarily about, oh, this is like not about the behavior, right? Because, I mean, think about if you were to look at anyone else's behavior from a certain point of view, from like a one sided perspective, right? And I think as we talk about teenagers, right? And no teenager should have a chart about their behavior with only the negative things in there,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
We're not going to take a time to log, she made her bed every day and she cleaned the bathroom once a week and she loves to rescue animals, and man, can she bake a mean cupcake. Like, she started a side business dog sitting at 17, 18 years old. She got her GED and therefore has her high school diploma. And and by the way, she did it before she even turned 18. Like, none of those things were going to be the things,
Right.
right? Like, that every time she goes and gets fast food, she would make sure to bring me back French fries because she knew I was at my desk all day. And she also knows
Mm.
that I love French fries, right? Like, those aren't going to be the things that would go into a behavioral file. And so I think that, just kind of skipping ahead to a little bit, but when we talk about thinking about teenagers being
Mm.
this historically very scary, we can't have we can't have a teenager that's in foster care in our home.
Mm.
Oh my gosh, like, they're not, I think there's this horrible stereotype of this scary teenager.
Sure.
And that's not what we experienced. Does not mean life is easy, and it does not mean that there aren't a lot of baggage, that there's a lot of baggage, that there's a
Of
lot of trauma
course.
that
Yeah.
comes. And, when she came to live with us, um, we even looked at with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And just every decision for like the first probably 6 months was
Basic.
based on, and
Yeah.
even when I was advocating for her, was based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mm.
right? Where your physiological needs,
Hmm.
that needs to be met. So do they have a roof over to their head?
Exactly.
Do they have clean air? Do they have access to water? Do they have access to food? Things that you were saying, right?
Yeah, the
Even from
wish
the start.
list. The wish list. I was
The
just
wish
like, oh my
list,
gosh, so
right?
many of these are like basic needs. Yeah.
And next comes safety, right?
Hmm.
Do they feel
Hmm.
safe where they are? Did they feel safe where they were? And after that is the love and belonging, and after that is their
Mm.
self-esteem, and then comes the self-actualization. So if you expect to
Right.
have a fully self-actualized human that comes to live with you that always has positive self-esteem, I mean, let alone the fact that being a teenager is freaking hard anyway, right?
Right.
At best, in growing up in the best of scenarios. So I think we made a lot of decisions of her living with us, just based on that, right? What does she need to feel safe? Is
Hmm.
this worth making a big deal out of, or is this not? Right? When we moved in, or when she moved in with us, she said, "Well, aren't you afraid that there's, like you're not closing the blinds all the way?" Because I had like a little row of succulents on a windowsill.
Mm.
And I said, "No, like that's just, I close the blind to the succulents so my little succulents can get light the next
Hmm.
morning." And she's like, "Well, aren't you afraid that there's going to be like a peeping Tom?" And I joked with her. I'm like, "Come on, nobody wants to peep in and see this, like, come on, we live in a good little suburban area." She's like, "No, really." And then one of the places she had lived in her past, that was a very real concern. So when she
Mm.
explained that, off went the
Yeah.
succulents from the windowsill, and the blinds go all the way to the
Sure.
sill, because her feeling safe was a
Right.
much bigger deal than having succulents on the windowsill, right?
Sure.
And so there were things like that, and there's a lot that we learned along the way. Um, so I think that if I, the more that I would see, um, the more that I would see, the harder it would be sometimes, as far as knowing about
Of
the
course.
past,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
that's the thing. It's even if you're welcoming a child into your home, like a teenager who has not had many behavioral issues that would give them like a really thick file, you're still bringing someone in who, I mean, that question is coming straight from fear, right? So it's like there's like nerves right at the surface of just so much trauma, so much change, and who knows what circumstances led to them being in the system in the first place. And so it's you're to me, I think it's overwhelming, not only, if there are behavioral issues, but also there's just so many emotional issues that are coming into your home. And it's like, how do you navigate that? There's a lot to that. And, you and I have spoken before about the young woman who has now transitioned into being self-sufficient on her own. It's I mean, that sounds like such an ideal situation, and you are so fortunate, and at the same time I'm sure it's extremely challenging. And I know it's a very delicate topic, so I'm not going into any detailed questions about all of that, but I am curious, like, you know how long was this? And essentially, very overarching question, how did it go? I mean, it sounds like it had a very positive outcome, but like, when you look at the situation, like, tell us whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. So she lived with us for a year.
Mhm.
She came to live with us just after she had turned 17. So a
Mhm.
couple months after she had turned 17. In her particular case, because everybody loves to ask the question of, were you planning to adopt, or are you going to adopt her? And the parental rights had never been terminated with her bio mom, and
Mm.
they still very much had a relationship. And I was not about to interfere with that. Whatever relationship she wants with
Sure.
her bio mom, that is up to her. She is certainly old enough to decide whether she does or doesn't want to speak with her now or later or
Hmm.
whatever that is, right? So that's not for me to get in the way. So really our goal was to make sure she had like that safe place to land
Hmm.
until, and I always told her, I'm not going to kick you out, but I'm not going to make you stay. So
Mm.
you are welcome to live here with us as long as you want to. And then she, so she was with us till she turned 18. And then when she turned 18, because she then no longer legally had to have a guardian over her, the state was no longer her guardian, because that's who technically her guardian was the state of Florida. And
Mm.
so you know, she turned 18 and we celebrated. She officially got her driver's license and she moved around for a little while. I mean, she stayed with us a little after she turned 18. So it wasn't like on her 18th birthday she left. So she stayed with us for a little longer until she was ready to move out. And so she is now, there's a lot of yada, yada, yada. And that's where a lot of that falls into, it's not all my story to
Sure.
tell.
Of course.
So, and again, it's not
Mm.
fair for me to only tell my side and my perspective. And so, but there's a lot of yada, yada, yada. And we were texting today and she's waiting to get approval on her first apartment on her very, on her own.
Amazing. Oh,
And
that's so
so,
great. That's so great.
in the state of Florida, if you've been in foster care if you've either aged out of foster care, meaning you were not adopted and you were not reunified, or if you were spent a certain amount of time in foster care, you're eligible for certain benefits. And so, one of those is a tuition waiver. So
Amazing.
she's, she's in college. She started college this semester,
That's
of
so
which
great.
I'm so stinking proud of her.
That's so great.
Um,
That's so
and
great.
whether she would have chosen college or a job or whatever it is, she's tried her hand at different skills in the meantime, and she's she's eligible for an assistance with an apartment because she is in schools, because they have
Mm.
programs for that. So she's eligible for that. In the state of Florida, if you're also enrolled in what's called PES, then you also, which is if you're going to school, you're enrolled in PES, so you are able to get an allotment of money every
Mm.
month. So they, they want you to focus on school as your job. You are still eligible to have Medicaid, which in the state of Florida, we use Sunshine Health. And even car insurance is waived as long
Mm.
as you're either working and in the EFC, Extended Foster Care Program, or the PES program. So there are certainly, which I'm grateful for, and all of those expire at different ages, right? So it's not like at one age everything is done. So
Mm.
the oldest I know, I was just looking the other day, and I think the PES program, or not PES, but tuition waiver, is until you're 28 years old. So some
Amazing.
kids will go on to get their masters, and if you could sneak a PhD in there, go for it, right? Like,
That's so
um,
incredible. It's so incredible. And
so
I'm not going to go into why, but I'm just very impressed that the state of Florida provides this. I,
well,
it's
yeah, the state of
incredible.
Florida, it's, I'm grateful that the state does.
Hmm.
There are certain other benefits that are so but this isn't the podcast to gripe about that, right? So that's a whole other set of conversations. But I will say that for those, I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful that
Definitely.
she's utilizing those benefits. I will say that
Exactly.
the original kiddo I advocated for, like I said, is actually her cousin and their
Mhm.
mutual aunt. So the aunt of both Hayden and the first kiddo I advocated for, they have an aunt collectively. So she's one of three siblings. She is one of the most selfless human beings I have ever met in my
Mm.
entire life, and is there for her nieces in ways I mean, I can't even describe.
Mm. That's
She is
great.
just one of the best aunt mama bears that
Mm.
I have ever known. And I am proud to at this point call her a friend, because she is definitely she's become one of my best friends at this point.
Oh, wow. That's
And
nice.
so we look at how can we kind of tag team things together. But I'm also very grateful that all the girls have this good relationship with her as well, because she is a phenomenal human being.
Thank goodness, right? I mean,
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
especially when you're dealt a hand that's maybe not the most stable or positive,
Mhm.
it's great
Yeah.
that there are still some really solid people in your corner. That's
Yeah.
everything.
So we say it's the baseball team. It's like a baseball team of teenagers,
I love
And the
it.
fact that one of them is about to be a preteen is wild.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the fact that there's one that's going to be 12 this summer is wild. But I am, I'm proud of the girls. I'm proud of their perseverance, and I think that there is, although it was not any of our easiest year, right?
Mm.
Not mine, not my husband's, not our teenagers, but I will say that we all can now look back on it and be like, oh, remember that? Like, um, it's just we look back and we kind of, at least this at this point in time, can say, oh, remember that was hard, and I joke, as I was pouring the last of some bubble baths she had given me into the bathtub a couple weeks ago. And I was like, remember when you got me this bubble bath because it was an apology, because there was like some snarkiness going on. I said, but that must have been when you first lived here, because we didn't realize, like, otherwise I'd have so much more bubble bath. We're like, we didn't realize how often this would happen over for the next year. And we just both laughed about it. But but that's also her heart, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's the way that her heart works.
That's
And
sweet.
so yeah, so I mean, we still very much keep in touch. I will say that the dynamic shifts, but the dynamic also shifts when even a bio parent, like even a parent
Oh, of
has a
course.
biological child
Yeah.
and the child goes out and the child needs more space,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
to not be
Individuating.
under
Mhm.
that wing. And it is a balance of, when do I swoop in and help? And when do I kind of go with natural consequences? But I will say, and she has said to me, because she's still dealing on a certain level with the system, just because of her benefits, and she has said to me, even very, very recently, that, she's like, while I'm glad and I'm grateful for your help, it's very frustrating that I still need it. Right.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
that I can't be taken seriously enough to get my
Mm.
point across on my own. So I think some of that is what happens at 18, 19 years old. She'll be 19 in a couple weeks. And some of
Wow.
that is still dealing with the system, of which we still very much deal with on a regular basis.
Totally.
So
Yeah. So you went into it a little bit. I was going to ask, like, how is she doing now and what your relationship with her is like now. And it all sounds quite positive. Is there anything more than you want to add to that?
yeah, I mean, I think that for I think anyone that says it's just like roses and sunshine,
Oh God.
um,
It
is
doesn't
lying.
matter however that connection is for, like, whatever, yeah,
Mhm,
biological, foster, like kinship,
mhm.
whatever it is, like
Yeah. Yep.
it's never going
No,
to be roses like all the
fire
time.
my pants on fire. But and it's not to say that there haven't been bumps in the road, but we keep in regular contact, and about anything from serious topics or frustrations to, I mean, like the rest of the world, when the whole Taylor Travis Kelsey found out they were dating, and then is Taylor going to be at the Super Bowl and she's
Oh, that's so
dropping an
good.
album? I mean, you want to get a teenager to talk to you as an adult, just bring up Taylor Swift and there we are,
Easy,
right?
easy peasy.
Done, done. So yeah, so it's everything from the big stuff to the little,
Mm,
and but it's also, from what I am, like I said, what I imagine it's like having this as, um I always say, if you would have raised a kid from scratch, right, is knowing how much space is not enough space and how much space is too much space, and knowing what that balance is, right?
sure.
And how to continue with learning lessons even after they're no longer living with you, right?
Hmm.
Because she is a young adult now, and the world sees her as a young adult.
Right.
So, but to me, I still very much see her as that like 17-year-old
Mm-hmm.
that, we went through a lot together. So, and again, all of those details are not for the world to know,
Yeah.
but there was a lot.
Sure. No, of course. And also it's an interesting time to welcome her into your home, because that regardless of family situation, that is the
Hmm.
period where they are individuating, right? So
Yes.
like,
Yes.
especially if you're not even with your bio mom and you're in this new context, that developmental stage is still at play. And so I
Hmm.
can only imagine, like, you're establishing a new relationship. I'm talking from the perspective of a child. You're establishing
Hmm.
this new relationship, you're living in this new home, and yet you're still like, but I'm an adult even though I'm not.
Well,
you know
and
and
it
yeah.
happens at such a different rate when they've been through foster care as well. So there's something called an ACE score that actually comes into play, right? And that's where it's the adverse childhood experiences, right? Which is what ACE stands for those of us that, listeners that aren't aware. And depending on what the child has been through, then they get essentially a point, and then the tally equals, the total number of points, and then that's what your ACE score is. And it could be everything from, was there personal physical abuse? Was there personal sexual abuse? Was there substance abuse in the home? Did they witness some of those things? Did they witness that on, their mother going through some of their thing, going through some of those issues? Did they personally experience homelessness? So there's a lot of that. And the higher the ACE score, essentially the more trauma that they've been through.
Hmm.
And the studies have shown it could lead to, um, I don't want to say developmentally having those issues, because that's not it, but just how they react to the world around
Of
them.
course, makes
So
total
I
sense.
think learning that, and there was so much research that I had done. I was on constant webinars and listening to books and reading books. And, we were in counseling. Like, my husband and I went to a few sessions to go, how the heck do we handle this together? So, how do we, um, proactively go into this as a united front? And how do we handle this situation or that situation? Because we aren't quite sure what to do here. We've never done this before. And that's where we had I highly recommend a great counselor. So I think if you're in that situation, I cannot recommend a great counselor enough. And there are some really wonderful grant programs, at least in the state of Florida, that are, will make you eligible if you want somebody that's not in your particular insurance plan. Um, so yeah, it's there's a lot that goes into it.
I think that's brilliant. And on top of it, just to your point about, like, how you and your husband, you hadn't had that experience before, but I
Mhm.
had, one thing that I know is certain, and I love that Jerry Seinfeld really, for me, just summed this up so perfectly. He's like, kids are great. You get a new one every 6 months. And it's just like, it's like,
So
even if Mara, you and your
true.
husband had raised Hayden from day one,
From
it's like
scratch, yeah.
you would still be like, I don't know this one. This is a new one.
It's always,
So
it's
yeah.
it's always something, Nicole. And just, even with food, like, even when you, like, okay, the foods you currently love are
Hmm.
SpaghettiOs, California rolls from Publix, and mac and cheese, but this is your favorite brand, and Panera broccoli and cheese soup. And then, 3 weeks later, I'm tired of all of those foods. This week I like, and I go, but we have like 10 cans of SpaghettiOs
Yeah, like,
that
we went to
we have
Costco.
still in the pantry, because those were the foods that you felt you loved, right? Those were like the easiest grab and goes
Hmm.
for you. And so I joke, because the amount of food that we would give to her aunt and uncle and her cousin, because I'm like, well, we don't do SpaghettiOs anymore, you know? So we're just, and I have a gluten sensitivity, so I'm not eating the SpaghettiOs. So, the amount of food we would take over and be like, oh, SpaghettiOs are out this week,
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
That's
Move it
a yeah.
along.
Yeah. And that's like a perfect, yeah, it's like a perfect symbolism for like everything else, right? It just changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
incredible.
And that's but and yeah, and that's whether there's foster care or not,
No,
right? So I think
absolutely. This is anybody. This is anyone. Yeah.
it is. And so I think, for us, I think the parts that made it where there's a lot of just parenting a teenager. I think we in particular, we let a lot more go in our particular home because we're like, you know what, in the grand scheme of things, it's so not worth the battle, right? Like so not worth the battle. Um, but there were things that we focused on together that we knew would be worth it in the long run, right? So, and a lot of it was very like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That was my like, where does this fall? What need do we need to be met here? That's how we're going to do this. So, but I think though that the part that made it different was when you aren't a foster parent, you don't have someone coming to your house every 22 to 25 days, checking in, having a conversation with your kiddo that is going to bring up the reminder of the situation that they're in. And they ask them about what they want to do with their future once they turn 18, because it's only 4 months away, 3 months away, 2 months away, and reminding them of this clock, like they're magically supposed to know what they want to do with themselves at 18 years old, right? Because there's this magical day. And so those are difficult, and getting,
That's so much
I'm supposed
pressure.
to I'm
It's
supposed to
like,
have a teenager that gets on a court call, every couple months just because of the situation that they were dealt, and they have
yeah.
to be on a court call. I mean, there's just things that aren't, I don't want to say, I hate to say when things are fair or they're not, but there's just certain things that aren't fair to the child. I understand why they're necessary because you don't want kids falling through the cracks, but it's they're just added levels sometimes. So I see it from all perspectives.
Yeah, and I see how necessary those check-ins are, of course.
I do. I do.
But I also can imagine how, like, especially if a child is getting into a groove with the new like foster family and things are feeling really comfortable, just that constant like, oh, but let's remember what the situation actually is. I can
Mhm.
imagine that that's jarring, you know,
Yeah.
and as necessary as those check-ins are, I wonder like the emotional toll that they take, you know, and
And yeah. And I saw it from a different perspective as far as, did I make the kids feel like that as an advocate? So I think even when I was an advocate, was very careful about how I worded
mm,
things and what I
mm,
asked and what I didn't ask. So yeah, it's
sure,
like sometimes you have to look at what can I perceive, and again, what's a big deal versus what's not a big deal. So
totally.
yeah.
Also, I'm really responding to like the pressure, like, hey, 17-and-a-half-year-old, what's your plan for the rest of your life? It's like, find a 25 or a 45-year-old who can like really answer that well. You know, it's just like
Yeah.
how I think it's absurd. I get it. It's once it is again, it's like I get it. And I get that it's sort of a necessary thing. And at the same time, like so much pressure for somebody who's
Much.
probably struggling to have a solid foundation to begin with,
Yeah.
you know, and then being like,
Yeah.
what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Figure this out right now.
I
Tell
think
us,
that
you
it's
know?
an absolutely ridiculous question personally to be asking our teenagers, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah.
Right? Because who I thought I was at 16 is not who I was at 18, is not who I was at,
Mm-hmm.
19 or 21 or 25 or 30. And I mean, I'll be 41 in May, and I'm a different person than I was even 3 years ago
100%.
or 2 years ago.
100%.
So,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and some days I still go, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right. I mean, I love what I do, but it's still the evolution of
Yeah.
what else do I want to layer in or take away. So those I think are very important. And I think we're not sensitive enough to how we're asking
How it's
our
coming
teenagers.
across, how it's being
Mhm,
experienced. Well, that's
mhm,
something too. Again, like, and certainly I have zero solutions to offer here. It's just me being an observer. But I wonder too how like for the number of humans that are on this earth, those are the number of
mhm.
unique situations, right? And so to have a system, and I can't think of another way to do it, but it's like you have a one size fits all system that you're trying to apply to all of these individuals. And I just don't
Mhm.
see how that's possible,
Right.
even if it's what's necessary right now, because there's not a better solution. Like yeah. And I'm not sitting here saying I have one. I'm just saying I'm
Right.
observing that, you know.
So right, right. And I think that that's where it's we have talked a lot about you don't have to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life now. That's okay.
Hmm.
Just what do you
What's
want
the
to
next
do?
thing? Yeah.
What's
What's
the next thing, right? And when they start talking about what are your short-term goals and what are your long-term goals in some of these meetings that they have the kiddos sit in on, with kiddos in foster care that are in like the extended programs. And I think we need to adjust what our definition of short-term and long-term goal is, right?
100%.
So,
Yeah.
um, their version of a long-term goal could be to get the apartment in
Hmm.
2 weeks. Like that could be that to them, that could seem like a long-term goal, right? And the short-term goal is what they're going to make for dinner tonight. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's okay, right? Short term, okay, well, I have class tomorrow, so short term is I need to get gas in my car
Right.
and I have homework. And
Yeah.
that's okay. That's a good short-term goal. So I think just rewording some of those
Hmm.
conversations. And again, I don't have a solution to it. I don't have a solution, but I know that our family has certainly turned out differently than we expected because by nature, not only do we have our and I joke with her that we're forever going to call her, our teenager. She's going to
Hmm.
be like 35 years old. I'm like, so my teenager, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't get her when she was a kid, right?
Hmm.
That was how that worked. So I didn't raise her from scratch.
Right. Your baby started
So
as a teenager.
yeah,
Yeah.
so she started as to me as a teenager.
Hmm.
And there were a couple photos that she has of her when she was little, that she had sent me one day, and I kind of saved them as my, on my favorites of my phone because a reminder of like she was that tiny
Mm,
one.
yeah.
She was still
Yeah.
engaged at one point, right? You're like your little one. So, um, but yeah, so she'll still be my teenager in
Hmm.
whatever word she wants to use for it. Like teenager seems to work for us,
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's great.
so it seems to work. But we have, not only her, but we have, she has an older sister that lives locally, and so I still hear from her older sister who never lived with us because she was already on her own when we met. And then I hear and have a very good relationship like with the girl's aunt and uncle and their cousin who, like I said, she's my Valentine's date tonight. So she's gonna, we're going and doing that tonight. My husband and I are taking her out. So it's and we all do now our big blended modern family. Um, we do holidays together. My parents were there the day that my teenager Hayden, the day that her cousin got adopted, by the aunt and uncle. Hayden was there and my husband and I were there and one of their friends was there and then my parents met us afterwards for lunch at IHOP. We're all just winging it. It's our blended modern family. This is how we do it.
So tell me about any like lessons, surprises, takeaways. If somebody was considering, doing this, or yeah, or if they've never thought about it, but they're listening to this and they're like, that sounds interesting to me. I'm curious, and this is not to necessarily like sell that idea. It's more just like what were your biggest lessons, your biggest surprises and takeaways? Because this wasn't something that you necessarily went into like, okay, we've been thinking about this and we're going to do it. It sort of fell into your lap and in this much more natural way. So I'm curious from that perspective, like, I'm sure there were a lot of feelings for you and your husband going into this. And so, yeah. And I know that you can't speak to like specifics, but just in general, lessons, surprises, takeaways.
Yeah. So I think so many thoughts. I think it will both break your heart, it will fill your heart, it will break your heart all over again. It is the most worthwhile and heartbreaking thing that to do, right? Because and simultaneously it will do both, because it is so worth it and so difficult, but so stinking worth it. So I think that's that. There are it I don't know that it necessarily compares to being a biological parent. I've never been like biologically, I've never had kids, so I can't say how it is or isn't different other than some of the things I've talked about earlier, of course. So I can't say from my personal experience, this is how it compares to being a biological parent. But a lot of people have told me it's more similar to being a step parent than it is to being, having kids biologically. And because there are other co-parents that live outside your home that are making these decisions. And so that is a big part of it. They often say that the goal is reunification. And so anybody that goes into becoming a foster parent, understand that you're not only doing it so that you can adopt a baby, right? And that's what I think so many people think, oh, I will adopt a baby. And this is a quote unquote easier or cheaper way to do it. That cannot be the only reason that we have
Yeah,
foster
it's a really bad
parents.
reason. That's a bad reason.
But I've heard
It's
both of
more
those.
cost
I've heard,
effective.
oh well,
Yeah.
I'll do that, and because if you do adopt through foster care, the majority of the time there is no cost. Um, but the goal of foster care, first and foremost, should be reunification, but safely, like safe reunification is the key. So I think that's a big part of that, which is another reason that your heart could absolutely break, right? If you go into it with different expectations. So I think that you won't know anything, or you won't know everything about, rather, the child that comes into your home. And but just like you don't know anything about any other human other than yourself, and so you have to accept that there is no way to know every single thing about the human being that's now coming to live with you. And that's going to throw you for a loop. And I say that there was trauma landmines often, because something as simple as me asking to do something really would trigger often a reaction in her that was so deep rooted that I knew nothing about an issue that it triggered in her, right? That's something that it triggered a memory of something that had happened 10 years earlier that I had no idea existed. And so I say there were like these trauma landmines, right? And for me, I'm just asking for a simple thing, or thinking I'm making the right decision, and it just explodes for that reason. So there's going to be trauma landmines. Um,
I, I'll just add to that. I've like I
yeah.
said, I follow some different accounts on Instagram and TikTok, and just to that point around not knowing what could trigger. I feel like it's really interesting. This one woman gives kind of like her videos come across as like sort of do's and don'ts. And one of
Mhm.
the things that, there's food insecurity is very common
Very,
for children in the foster care system. And
very
so
much.
just making sure that they know where the food is and that it's always available to them. And
Mhm.
especially if they've had experience in a group home where there's also like, it's like food is sort of like politicized and like,
Oh,
and there's like yeah, I
don't
don't,
even get me started on group homes. Those
right.
are, our teenager had experienced group homes, and so we had the unfortunate opportunity of learning a lot about them, um, just anecdotally through her. And she was living in a group home when I first met her. So I was seeing what was going on. She still keeps in very close contact, as to I, with her previous guardian ad litem, who isn't technically her guardian ad litem now that she's over 18, but she's still, this amazing human. Victoria is just very much still in everybody's world.
Mm.
But Victoria had been on, on our teenager's case for, I mean, since she came into care almost. So you're talking, it's now, I think she's known her 5+ years, maybe more. And so she had seen her through all these issues, and we all have very big thoughts on group homes. And they very much use food as a tool, right?
Yeah, yeah, it really sounded
I've seen them take
unhealthy.
away like a microwave as a punishment, but yet
Mm.
they don't have oven ready food there. All like the
Mm,
food is like the dinners and things you need, or like the lunches you would need to use a microwave for to heat up. Um, so, but no one's teaching the kids either, teaching them how to make food on the stove where they don't have food that is
mm,
stove ready. So
right.
it's a whole,
Yeah.
yeah, a whole
Well,
issue.
yeah, like the woman who she was basically kind of saying like just let them know where it is, don't place any, like from this time to that time you can have food. And also something that I thought was really interesting is to not offer too many options, like ask or like in a conversation, like you can do this or you can do that or you can do like that can be very triggering. It's just like a lot. It's just overwhelming. And so things that are not obvious, they're not obvious
Mhm.
because to your point, they're landmines that like you don't know
Right.
when is something's going to be triggered. And it can be a very innocent conversation you're having, or you're asking what you think is an innocent question, and it is an innocent question, but it's being received differently. And
Yes.
there's just, yeah, it's definitely a different type of experience from what
Mhm.
I would imagine most traditional families, where there's like,
Mhm.
it's just it's different. It takes a
Yeah,
different toolkit to
it
navigate
does.
it.
And I think, I guess too, coming back to, advice, I think being as trauma informed as possible,
That's
right?
a yeah.
Because it's for those of us that haven't gone through that and haven't gone through what a lot of the kids have, then you need to research what's on the other side of this, right?
Sure.
And so there are some really, really good books. The Body Keeps the Score is great. There's some
Mm.
really good accounts to follow on social media. I know you and I have talked about that. And so those are honestly, like, I think we've talked to specifically about teenagers,
Hmm.
at Foster the Teens by, Brittany
Love
Burton's
her.
show
I would, yes, I love her.
is
Yeah.
the amount of times that I would watch and just kind of log it for later, and had to bring out so many of the things that she experienced, just to help me figure out, like, how do I handle this? Is that, when I would see a video that she posts and go, okay, so we're not the only ones going through this particular
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah, she's really
Um,
helpful. I mean,
yes.
I can't even think about the number of topics that she's covered, but really useful information. And now she has her own bio baby. And, but yeah, yeah, Foster the Teens. I'm going to put all of this on the website because I think it's important for anybody who's interested to take a look. This was not a situation that you were actually planning for. It just kind of naturally happened. What would you say was the biggest surprise that you just couldn't believe coming out of this experience?
I mean, I want to give the initial answer was I was surprised that she was still growing at 18 years old when she grew in age, when she grew in age while living with us.
That is a surprise. That is a surprise, especially for girls. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think I just will never forget. We laughed. She made the medical assistant at the doctor's office measure her 3 times because she goes, I've been 5'2" for all this time. I've been 5'2" for years. What do you mean I'm 5'3"? And I think it came into like, maybe it was 5'2" and a half, or been five, or like 5'2" and 3/4. But she grew, like, but that's what lack of proper nutrition and proper sleep will do to your body. Yes, I was surprised because I'm going, wait a minute, you're still growing. Like, this is just wild to me. But also, I think the other reason too was I was just surprised at the effects, the long-term effects that this can have on the human body. The
Totally
long-term
makes
effects
sense.
stress can have on the human body. And I think that, it doesn't solve itself overnight. Not that we thought that it would, but it takes a really long time and it takes a lot of focus. So I think that's something just for everyone to keep in mind. But yeah, I think I was surprised, not just at the growth, but at what it is that trauma can physically do to somebody,
The,
both psychologically, physiologically, everything. So
that makes so much sense. And I'm a little bit blown away by that too, that at 17 your body's like, "Oh, wait a second. Am I safe? Like can I sleep at night like a full night's sleep? And do I have access to healthy foods that help you grow?" Because you hear this when you're growing up, but you hear it like when you're 7, like you need to eat this, you need to drink this, otherwise you're not going to grow, to be strong. And yeah. And it's like, and I guess that applies to 17-year-olds as well. Like your body's just sort of like, oh, we can do this now. Okay, let's grow an inch. Because yeah, it makes sense. And I would agree with you. That's a surprise for sure.
Yeah. So for me, that was, I think, I think that learning was a
Mm,
surprise. So I think, look, we went through a heck of a lot of other things that were thrown at us that were also surprises. But that I think that's my initial reaction, and the one
sure.
that I think is easiest to maybe share publicly too.
Yeah, I get
But
that. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, along with all the other instances that we talked about today.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm going to be listing resources on the episode page on the website, doingthisdifferently.com. But I definitely want to. We talked about some of them, CASA, and you mentioned a few others. But
Mhm.
from your experience, what would you say? And you can repeat those as well. Like, what are different ways that people can support children in the foster care system? What would you like people to know? Let's say that somebody's just like, I just can't imagine. I'm one of these. I can't imagine having
Yeah,
another child in my
totally.
home. It's
Right?
enough. Where
Mhm.
one is enough.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, like, CASA has always, and that's court appointed
Special advocate.
special advocate.
Mhm.
That's always been one that has caught my eye. And I think once Dylan's a little bit older and I feel like I have more bandwidth, that's probably something that I'm going to look into. But what are other ways? Because to me, I think I'm sure I'm not alone in seeing this issue, being very overwhelmed by it, sad,
Yeah.
and also just shout out to all the amazing foster care parents like yourself, Mara.
Yes.
It's
Yeah. Okay.
not a bleak
It's
experience for everyone, but unfortunately, the majority of children in the system could use some more support, and
yeah.
everyone can use some more support. So, um, yeah, any thoughts on things
So
that
many. That's
people
where
can?
I go, this is my time, right? Like I've been stretching, I've been ready for this
Woo!
one.
Let's do
Yes, this is it.
it.
So, I think if we start at, I don't know if I never know. Do I start like the easiest to the toughest? I think that obviously look, we've talked about becoming a foster parent. That's at like the highest level of support, right? It is a need everywhere. There are kids that are literally, there are so many kids that we do not have foster homes or even group home slots for all of them. And there are kids sleeping in offices for the agencies just because they don't have a place to sleep right now. So foster homes, but also that's not for everybody. We are not currently, we don't currently have an active foster care license. So our license was level 1, meaning it was for Hayden and Hayden only. And so we haven't, since she moved out, we haven't had a kiddo in our home. So I understand it's not for everybody. We talked about either being court appointed special advocate or volunteer advocate for children, the guardian ad litem, depending on what the program is in your county, because it does differ county to county. But I also think that there's mentor programs available often within the licensing agencies. So even though in Florida, we privatize foster care. Please don't get me started. That's a whole other thought.
Hmm.
But sometimes those mentorship programs, whether it's through, here in the state of Florida, it's DCF, Department of Children and Families. Sometimes there's different acronyms state to state as far as what that department is called. Um, sometimes it's just different acronyms for whatever that department might be, but they often have mentorship programs, right?
Hmm.
So you can always be a mentor with different levels of support, but there are some really simple, easy ways to give back to, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, you have Dylan. Dylan is 3, and I'm assuming growing out of her clothes, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
Um, hopefully she is not the same size she was the day you brought her home, right at 3 years old.
She has
But
grown.
yes. So that being said, if you're looking to donate clothes, look at
Hmm.
donating them to a foster closet, because
That's
that
great.
way other and if there goodness, if there's not a local foster closet, you surely can start one or look on. There's all sorts of groups for Facebook groups, whether there's one here called Pass It On here in Orange County, but there's literally for foster parents that they can exchange, almost like a buy nothing group, but for foster care, right? So that way, if a child comes into care, you never know the size of the child that is going to come live with you. And so you can't have a full closet of every single size and every single style, and you don't know. And at 3 years old, they might be a 5T, they might be 12, getting into 12-month-old clothes. You don't know. So I think that's an easy way, is to donate to your local foster closet for clothes that gently used, not
Yeah,
the
of course.
not the
Yeah.
ones that have holes in the knees,
Holes and
right?
stains. Yeah, no.
No,
I,
because the
as,
kids still deserve dignity.
of
So that's
course.
very much, so I think that's a big one. Same thing with toiletries, quite honestly.
Mm,
So
yeah.
they can often use toiletries if they're going from place to place, then
Mm,
that's something that they can take with them.
yeah.
I also say check with your local group homes. Your agency, your local foster care agency will know about those resources, or the CASA program or Legal Aid Society. We often will get donations of suitcases. And this is really important, because when kids are pulled from their home
The
or
trash
when they
bag.
move placement to placement, yep, they are told you have 15 minutes and all your things go in black trash bags.
Hmm.
And kids should not be moving their things in trash bags.
Oh
It's
God,
just,
what a message,
kids aren't
right?
trash.
Mm-mm.
They aren't trash. And so allowing them to move with their things in suitcases. Sometimes they need suitcases because they are approaching reunification. And that
Mm,
means that they're going to start having visits with their bio parent, on the weekends, and they need a way to move their things back and forth. Backpacks are another one, because they're
hmm.
moving school to school to school, and maybe they didn't have time to grab their backpack from their last placement. So now they don't have a backpack or school supplies. So that's another easy thing to donate. So I also recommend speaking with local group homes and finding out what are the needs that they have. Some have space for suitcases. Some say we don't really physically have the space for suitcases, but we'll happily take duffel bags because we can collapse them and put them in a
Right.
closet. Some say no, we're good with that, but quite honestly, we need pajamas. We need new pajamas or new socks or new underwear.
Mm.
um, I've had them say to me, we need new Crocs or
Mm.
slides, so that when kids come in, sometimes they don't even have shoes. And that
Yeah.
way it's just something easy. So there's so many different needs
This is
and
so great.
amazing programs. There's a program called One Simple Wish. That's a great one. They post
I
wish
love
lists.
that one.
Yes. Have you
I
heard of
love
this
that one.
one?
I've donated to that one.
Mhm.
Go ahead and explain it. I think this is so beautiful.
People can, and I've just recently done a little more digging on their website, but because they're working on some new programs over there as well. But basically, the child's caseworker or their guardian ad litem is able to put in a wish list, and this could be anything from a pair of shoes to a TV to a backpack to, I mean, it could be little,
Like a
it could be
bike
bigger.
or a
I mean,
blanket. Yeah. Yeah.
correct. And so I will say, go on and look at the wish lists. And
Love it.
depending on your budget, there's something for almost everybody. I've seen amazing things, even within our local, like within our county. We have someone who has, I don't know if Kathy has dubbed herself or been dubbed as the bike fairy. Her name is Kathy Downs, and she's just an avid bicyclist. And she now collects bicycles. She has a team of fellow cyclists, both hobby and those that work in bike shops, and so people all year will donate bicycles. And then twice a year, she really partners up with the Guardian Ad Litem program. And twice a year, they put this out. They have an event at a local school in the parking lot. And kids that have an active open case whether it's in our county or one of the neighboring counties, can come and pick out a bicycle, and they get a helmet as well. And so for some kids, they just have never had a bicycle. For our teens, a lot of times that's their mode of transportation. So that's how they get from one place to the other. So it really is important.
Yeah,
Just
that's I
there's
love
so
that
many things.
organization.
And so one simple wish is really a great one, to
That's
be able
awesome.
to do that too. So I think it's just oneSimpleWish.org.
Yeah.
So
I'll put all of these
small,
together on the
big,
website. Yeah,
yes, yes. So big, small, there are so many opportunities
totally.
to help.
And thank you for the reminder of the foster closet, because I do donate Dylan's clothes. There's a
Mhm,
local place, and what's nice is that, similar to what you were saying about like what I love is so many organizations that I know of here locally in San Francisco are really tapped into the idea of dignity. And
mhm,
what I love is that, where I donate the clothes, they have they they make appointments with folks in their community to come in, and they're given like, I think a half hour or something like that to just choose whatever they want. But it operates like a store, but it's
mhm.
all free.
Yep.
And but you give, like, you still, the kids get the experience of like, it's like a store, but it's free. And so, but you're right, Dylan grows and she's grown out of a lot of things. And so I will look into that myself. I hadn't really thought about that. But I think that's another great option of where to donate
And I
clothes.
think especially as, certain places like Goodwill are just overflowing with things, and, I mean, you wanna make sure you wanna make sure you're giving what you would want and be comfortable with your own child wearing. So I've had people that have gifted me used underwear, and I'm like, "No, they deserve some new underpants," right? I've had them with a snowsuit. We live in Florida. They will never need a children in foster care sometimes aren't even legally allowed to leave the state, and, most days it's 70 to 95 degrees, so no need for a snowsuit. And then every once in a while, people will give, like, they'll just drop them off in my carport, and they'll give, like, a bag of clothes, but there's, like, a single shoe in there, and I'm like, "We don't want a single shoe." So,
Yeah, you can be a little more
uh
deliberate about what you're
right,
offering, for sure.
exactly. So, but all that to say that while having a child that is currently in foster care in your home may not be what is right for your particular family right now, but there are so many ways to give back, and there's so many ways to either advocate or donate time, donate money, donate,
Mm,
just volunteer. And sometimes it's as simple as just dropping off toiletries, right? That's it.
that's great. And I love how actionable, and to your point, like, there's a nice range, right?
Mhm.
There's lots of ways that you can support children in childcare
Yeah.
in foster care. um,
Yes, it's true.
let me say that again. There are many
Yes.
ways to support children in foster care, and you've given us so much inspiration and so much good information, Mara. I just really thank you and your husband for doing what you've done, and for advocating and telling your story to inspire others who might be curious about this path. I say in every episode, families come in all flavors, and this is a really beautiful and unique one. And I'm so glad we were able to talk about this. And just
Thank you.
thank you for coming.
Absolutely. And I know I would not possess the knowledge that I do without, the people that I get to do this with, but also honestly without Hayden having opened my eyes to so many other deep, incredible needs. And so there's always something to be said for that too. She's a pretty incredible kid, even though she's not really a kid anymore, but a pretty incredible teenager as she enters the last year of being technically a teen, although she'll always be my teen. And I love her, and it's just, this is how our family goes, right? I was not able to be there in a way that was able to pull my brother out of his addiction. But I really hope that we're able to make the world better for others, so that they don't experience quite the same heartbreak in quite the same way, and that they're able to continue on doing good.
Definitely. And I'm so sorry to hear about your brother. And I know that a lot of people can relate to that experience. And I also love how that experience and the one with your grandmother inspired you. You know, you are a natural caregiver for sure, you know, and whoever you were speaking to who was encouraging you to do this, it's true. I mean, I think we all see ourselves in a particular light, but it's like so much of what we're doing could be a perfect skill set for, and not just skill set, but it's just like having the heart space for this, you know. And caregiving's caregiving. It doesn't matter who the recipient is, and it's very clear how much you've loved the children that you've worked with, and more than anything else, I think that's what we all need.
Thank you. Well, here's to doing things differently. Here's to doing this differently, and families coming in all shapes and sizes.
Totally, totally. Yeah. Well, thank you again so much. I so appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Nicole.
Also, if you're part of a unique family and you want to have a conversation with me, please reach out. Doingthisdifferently.com. Happy to chat with you. I think it's really important, as I've had these conversations with all these different families, you know, normalizing what makes your family unique is really helpful. It also helps children learn about inclusion and opens their minds as well as their parents, and gives everybody a shared language and understanding of what it means to be a unique family. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.